Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Steel Sharpens Steel. I am Tom Cunningham, and joining me, as always, is Chuck Hobbs.
Good evening, Tom Cunningham.
How are you doing?
Good to talk to you. It's been a long day, but looking forward to the conversation this evening.
Yes, indeed it has, and I am too looking forward to it. Joining us as well is the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition, David J. Johns.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And our final panelist for the evening is Stacey Long Simmons. Stacey, hello.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. It is our pleasure indeed. I do want to let folks know who we're looking forward to Sharon Lettman-Hicks joining us today. She was called away, but she will be joining us again on future episodes. And she wishes us all the best. And we look forward to a spirited discussion about this conversation that is taking place across the internet and the broadcast airwaves today. So let's get right into it. Andrew Gillum making a major revelation with the season opener of Tamron Hall's program. The headline from that hour-long interview is that Andrew has presented himself and identifies as a bisexual. And that is riveted the nation. Lots of different conversations, lots of different people weighing in with different perspectives. But I want to know from you, Chuck, you had a very poignant piece that you posted on social media today about Andrew as fellow Rattlers. We have always stood behind him and congratulate him and RJ for being so candid and honest. What is your perspective of what you saw today in the interview?
Somewhat disappointed that here we are in 2020 and we still have to have these first type of conversations. You know, as I noted in my piece earlier today on my Facebook page, I have a long history with Andrew Gillum in regards to being family. I know that we who attended Florida A&M University, we like to call ourselves FAMU, and that is true as well. But Andrew has been like a little brother to me for quite some time. I met him when he was still in high school. I was a first-year law student at the University of Florida College of Law. And then when I graduated and was a young prosecutor in Tallahassee, he had already come up to Tallahassee to attend Florida A&M University. And so I was able to watch him grow as a student and a leader on that campus. I was able to actually participate in one of the huge protest marches that he led when the state of Florida was trying to be up to its usual shenanigans with regards to race and the higher education system. And I knew early on that he was marked for greatness because of his leadership ability. And I remember very distinctly, as I wrote today, when he decided to run for the city commission at the age of 23, a race that he won, I was very proudly supported him and have supported him in every race that he has run since then. So again, he is like a kid brother. And obviously, when he did not win the gubernatorial race back in 2018, it was devastating for a lot of us. I remember that when we were dealing with the recount, I was one of a number of lawyers across the state of Florida that actually was working within the various counties to make sure that all I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And we just did not get across that hump. And so I think that there are a confluence of things that came out of that Tamron Hall interview today. One, obviously, is the revelation that he's come out and said that he's a bisexual male. And I look forward to having that discussion this evening, too. But also, I think that we would be remiss if we do not talk about mental health issues, particularly depression, self-medication for depression, and the fact that I want to talk tonight about how even we as Black people, because we know that he has had a lot of pushback from conservatives and from even some Democrats in the white community who did not support him in 2018. They supported Gwen Graham or other candidates. We get that. But as Black people, one of the things or two of the things that we continue to struggle with in this country is homophobia, and we continue to struggle with the issue of mental health. Everybody wants to talk about, well, just take it to the Lord in prayer. You need to hit your knees. God has solved this and that. And I'm a Christian, and I believe that God can solve some things, but I also believe that God is a God of love. And I think that far too often, Black people in this country have sounded no better than some of our white counterparts when they're talking about race. I believe that if you just juxtapose race with sex, or if you're dealing with mental health issues, why can't you just pull yourself together? I'm not understanding this. Take it to the Lord in prayer. people don't understand that sometimes taking it to the Lord in prayer is not enough. Sometimes you need medication. Sometimes you need time out to sit on somebody's couch and get some good, hard, conversation about what it is that you are struggling with. So again, I'm looking forward to this panel tonight and discussing what it is we heard today and what we will be looking for going forward for both Andrew Gillum and his lovely wife, Jay.
So, David, I want to turn to you. The National Black Justice Coalition released a press release today talking about the Tamron Hall interview, as well as a number of other topics, and bisexuality was centered in that press release. What is your perspective as the head of America's first and only civil rights organization centered on the Black LGBTQ struggle? Unmute.
What happens when you have a puppy and you're a new puppy parent? You don't want the sound to interfere, so you figure to unmute. I appreciate the question, as well as a reflection shared thus far. And three things come to mind for me. One is all of this is nobody's business. I am so very proud of my brother, Andrew, and my sister, RJ, for the way in which they are blazing trails. Again, to the point that was just made, in 2020, we should not be having firsts with regard to acknowledging that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black, trans, queer, and non-binary people. But here we are. And so acknowledging that, I still want to underscore that the covenant, as RJ named it, between Andrew and RJ is theirs, period, full stop. And there are still so many people who were asking so many questions that they're not entitled to the answers. And I want people to be clear about that. And for us to spend a little bit more time acknowledging that far too often we have expectations of people's private lives because they live public lives or show up in public service. And that's problematic. The second thing is, I applaud both of them for stepping into a space that is uncharted territory. And it's complicated terrain, as it is true that this is nobody's business and they should be able to live their life and negotiate their covenant as they have decided. It's also important because it can't be true based on sheer mathematical opportunities that Andrew is the only highly visible Black bisexual man. But here we are, right? I say the same thing often about the reality around Magic Johnson being the only highly visible Black man we know living with HIV. It's a mathematical impossibility, but a lot of that is because of where we are as a society, which leads me to my third point. I hope that this allows us to continue to have conversations about members of our community who have always existed, about the work that needs to be done both within the LGBTQIA+ community and outside of it, to ensure that all of us can be free. And for me, that means happy, healthy, and whole. So I know we'll come back to the mental health pieces. Two things that were really instructive for me in pulling together the quick fact sheet. One is very few people have ever heard of the term bi-erasure. And I'm eager to hear my colleague and friend Stacey talk more about this. But bi-erasure is what happens to people who are bisexual, who themselves are rendered invisible, or their relationships are rendered invisible because of the assumptions and stereotypes that exist about bisexual people. For example, that a man who is bisexual is simply gay and is either not claiming it or is on the pit stop to being gay. That denial, that erasure of what it means for somebody to be bisexual is a form of bi-erasure. And there were many people who said today that it was the first time that they encountered that term. The second thing is to the point that Brother Cobbs made, the mental health challenges and the consequences of the shame and stigma that bisexual people, Black bisexual people in particular, right, who are dealing with two different simultaneous forms of marginalization as a result of racial, ethnic, and sexual identity marginalization, right? Like there's a significant percentage of, I think 40% of bisexual men who deal with high rates of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and physical assault. Bisexual people are less likely to have disclosed this information to their doctors or to their employers, right, for fear of discrimination. And so much of this for me is about acknowledging that for anybody that cares or purports to care about Black people in the way in which Andrew has demonstrated over the course of his lifetime, has to adopt new language and make space to develop competencies and demonstrate compassion for bisexual members of our community.
So I want to bring Stacey into the conversation. Stacey, you are an LGBTQ policy expert, and so obviously your journey and your sexual expression is different from Andrew's. But as you are a bisexual woman in a committed marriage, what resonance did you find in the Tamron Hall interview about how Andrew and RJ navigated their relationship and how that patterned or gave you some impressions about your own marriage?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. Well, I'll say this. One of the things that many of us who identify as bisexual know is that there is a constant coming out process. You don't just come out and that's it. So with respect to the high profile nature of what RJ and Andrew just did, hopefully, they're done with it. They won't have to continue to navigate different circles and go through that process again. I know it wasn't easy. I applaud what they did. But the average person who is living a bisexual experience over the course of my own life, I have been in and out of the closet. And quite frankly, it's because of the duality, the bi-erasure, the fact that if you are in a predominantly same-sex environment with other women, and if they know that you are bisexual and that you date men, some automatically off the bat really just don't want to have anything to do with you. And so there's a lot of community that's at stake, a lot of support that you can lose, friendships, having access to opportunities, jobs, all sorts of things are really on the line for individuals who are bisexual. And so on the other hand, if you are someone who is perceived to be straight, as a lot of feminine presenting women like myself are, then you have to make a point of saying, hello, I am bisexual, don't make assumptions about me. So my wife knew that I was bisexual when we met because I was dating different people and at the time. And so she knew that I was dating men, that I was dating women, and I was single. And when we decided to make our relationship a committed relationship and defined our own parameters, like I love that piece about the covenant that exists between relationships. That was when we talked about, okay, so this means just the two of us. We're not having other liaisons with other people. So for her, it may have taken a little bit of like, okay, what's this like bisexual thing, like to really get it and really sort of like observe and come to trust, and also be able to convey it to her friends. But eventually they got it. But often people just dismiss it. They're just like, you're just a confused lesbian. Why don't you, if you're with a woman or if you're with a man, oh, you're straight. You just, play around a little bit.
Can I make a point? Can I push on
Absolutely.
something that Stacey said? And I want to apologize first. I called my brother Cobbs and not Hobbs. I have a really good friend, Chris Cobbs, so that was a Freudian slip. I want to highlight something Stacey said at the beginning of her comments, which is that the term and the idea that people are required to come out is wholly problematic. And we at NBJC have a campaign called Inviting In to describe exactly that, right? And there are two things that I think are important. One, so many people ask the question today of whether or not RJ knew. Again, I think it's a problematic question to ask because it's none of your business. But what RJ said is yes, right? Like, I entered into this marriage having this information about a part of what makes Andrew who he is and how he shows up in the world. And it is also the case that that information is not owed to anybody else outside of their relationship. And so what Andrew did today was invite us all in, right? And we can debate and discuss how we arrived at this point. But the fact of the matter is, again, people should not feel entitled to this information. That is why the closet exists. That is why so many people feel pressured into the closet, because of this expectation that this part of them is owed to people. The second thing that's really troubling for me about this dynamic and unequal power distribution is that seldom is it the case that straight people, strictly heterosexual people, have to explain when they knew they were strictly heterosexual. they'll stand with their arms folded, expecting on National Coming Out Day for queer people to recite some traumatic ass story, but they can't offer the parallel experience. And so I highlight these things because too often we don't think about them, right? Like National Coming Out Day is just celebrated. And then people are like, well, the queers got everything. They can get married now. They can do this. One, is different when you're Black and like, let's not forget that Andrew is a Black man. And so the grace that he otherwise might have been given had he been a woman and we, rested into two women together still being the object of male fantasies. If he had been white and had privilege based on that, this would have been a very different thing. But because he is a Black man and we don't have conversations, one, about sexual fluidity, the assumption is almost always that Black people are strictly heterosexual. And then again, like bi-ness doesn't really exist. It's not a thing for most people. It's a throwaway line. It's still something that with women is kind of celebrated and with men evokes a sense of disgust. And so I really want us to trouble not only these terms that exist, but the boxes that too often we try and put people into. This came up for me with Niecy Nash, where people are like, well, I thought she was with a man. She was, and now she's with a woman. And if there's a question, it should be like, is she loved? And it seems like she is, just like it seems like Andrew and RJ love each other. And we should all celebrate that.
Yeah, I have to say, Niecy looked extraordinarily happy in the photos I saw. So I mean,
I don't like rainbows, but I want those sneakers.
I mean, she seemed happy in both of her relationships. Frankly, I was surprised when she announced that she was divorcing her husband. I was surprised when she announced her new marriage. But again, I think it's probably easier for Niecy Nash just because she is in the entertainment industry. Her partner is also in the arts. And so I think there's a little bit of societal forgiveness for those artistic types. I mean, obviously people like Janelle Monáe has not suffered from her expressions of sexual fluidity. Tessa Thompson. I mean, I know more than a couple of brothers who was like, damn, now that's a combo. So I mean, it's like,
yes, except that yes, and ... The jury is still out for me with regard to Niecy in particular because her partner is masculine presenting. So the idea of Janelle and Tessa Thompson again plays into every male's fantasy. It even like again, regardless of sexual identity, like we can have that conversation. But when people don't fit into the box, again, the box is two women can be together as long as it's playful and or I get to enjoy it in my mind or in real time. But the idea that like there are two women who are in love, who are in a covenant with each other, who are figuring out how to live life together, that's different. We've not had to negotiate that with Janelle Monáe. It's still a fantasy. The relationship with Tessa Thompson is still cute because they're in videos with each other. At the moment in which she announces a relationship, I think it might be different.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree, but at the same time, you've had Melissa Etheridge and you've had
she's white. I don't want to talk about white people.
Okay, well, that's true. Okay, that's true. The intersectionality is absolutely certain. Go ahead, Stacey.
Well, there's one word that we haven't talked about, and that is how power operates in this current society. So while I agree with what my brother David has said about we shouldn't have to, the problem for me, from an advocate standpoint, has been it's difficult to make the case that we exist if everyone is in the closet. And so destigmatizing it and normalizing it and having conversations where we acknowledge the fact that this is nothing new, this is as old as time, really is where we are today. And in fact, I think it's safe to say that we are all around the same age. I don't know. I use good face cream. But on a serious note, younger people aren't really tripping, right? Like if you were to look at some of the comments, I would say, younger people, they have a whole plethora of terms and words and, they reject labels. Some of them don't even use bisexual. I mean, there's a lot of complexity there and nuance. But for me, until we have explicit protections, until we are able to be who we fully are in every single aspect and slice of the world, then we still have that cautionary issue, because you're not going to put yourself out there and be vulnerable if your family has kicked you out. Where are you going to go when you lose your job? So, I mean, we really have to pull in, like you were saying, David, and have this community conversation amongst ourselves, Black people, family time, etc., and just make sure that we start answering questions so that people can begin to wrap their heads around something that's been oh so hush hush and whispered about for eons.
You know what, Stacey, you've made a very good point, and I have a clip from the Tamron Hall after show that I want to show right now. Here it is.
We have here, Bertie can pull it up for me, and I'll get to Niall from Charlotte.
Typically, when you make your partnership choice in life, if you're a man and you choose another man, you then live as a gay couple. No one, even if one is bisexual, that isn't a part of the identity that gets revealed. If you are bisexual and you're married to a different gendered person, you don't go out there and broadcast that you're bisexual at this point. You're just in a heterosexual marriage. And so, in some ways, and this is the disservice of it, is that you then have to, from an identity standpoint, not who you have sex with, but from an identity standpoint, you have to betray one to then embrace the other. And I think people then make up their minds, that you're embarrassed or you're closeted or you're not full of who you are, you're not living your truth, you're not in your, at this stage, given my having bared all, I could care less about all of that. My therapist put it this way: you can save face, you can save your ass, but you can't save them both at one time. And so
which
for
are
me,
you trying to say?
forget about saving face. Right now, I'm saving myself first, meaning by healing and being honest. And by virtue of being able to do that, then I can make decisions that are in my integrity.
Right.
So that, I think, was a very powerful moment in the conversation that he had with Tamron. And Tamron was pressing him on a number of issues, but that was a very honest time when we were talking in the aftermath of even just the announcement of what was going on and that he was re-entering into public life. One of the questions that has occurred in conversations I was participating in is, what is his way forward and how is he going to address what happened? Is there any way for him to move past it without addressing what happened? And clearly he made the choice to come out and make the revelation that he did. But I know a lot of people were saying he cheated on his wife and this, that, the third, and the other. There is nothing in the record that indicates that that was the case. That's a very important thing to say. He was in the grip of a serious depression. It was affecting some of the choices he made. But from the testimony that he offered in the interview today, there was no indication that anything went down. He said he had a drink and he woke up. And so I think that's an important distinction to make, because a lot of people are looking at this through the lens of their own experience and less through the lens of what he and RJ had agreed upon in their covenant, which they are only now today finding out about. I think a lot of people presumed that, oh, he was down low and was running around behind her back and poor RJ. But what we found out today is that he has a remarkable wife who is with him, who has understood for the entirety of their marriage and the family that they have built together, that this was a part of his personhood. And I think that is important. And I think that we need to be able to say that forcefully so that people don't walk around here when there were a few other major public figures who also had imbroglios about their families and their dalliances. Certain famous pastors, certain former presidents of conservative universities who were engaged in situations that are less than within. David with the sips tea. You have your teacup up, David, so I'm going to give it to you. What do you have to say on that?
I was actually drinking in real life. What do I have to say to that? I keep thinking about a meme I saw some time ago that said, I pray that you heal so that you can experience the world not through the fog of your trauma. And I find, even as I look at my social media feed, that so many people who have latched on to this idea that Andrew is A, gay, and B, an adulterer, with no evidence to affirm either, right? These are people who didn't watch the interview, who don't know and have no relationship with Andrew or RJ, who might have had some engagement with the campaign or know someone who went to FAM, for example, but who I think should have every reason to give him grace. And as he said in the interview, right, if you're going to judge, I'll say it, if you're going to judge him based on the shit that he's done for our community in the interest of our country, in the service of our democracy, not on what you think he did based on some tweets that Candace Owens sent and lines from a police report that we don't even know where they came from or how they fit together, right? I struggle. I will never be able to unremember watching Andrew try and recall what happened in the span of 3 hours. And again, I like to think that none of us ever want to live out our worst moments publicly. And I like to think that we should offer others, especially if we purport to care about Black people, the kind of grace that we would want if that were us. And so this is a really long way of saying that, like, it pisses me off that people don't want to listen to that which exists, like the actual, like, evidence, like things that people are saying, in particular two people in a relationship, while they're holding so much judgment.
You know, Chuck, one of the things that Andrew expressly said in the interview relates to how no one wants to be judged on the very worst moments of their lives. You've been involved in a number of cases. You've been watching the political space and the political spheres for years and commenting on it. What's your take on this of Andrew's worst moments and the road back as he continues to be a very gifted political speaker, a gifted thinker, a person who has a lot to offer, to continue to offer to the broader community, as David said, to the country, even when we have a person at the nominal head of the country who every single day is offering us his worst 30 minutes. So what do you...
Or the head of that state.
Yeah, I mean, what is your take on Andrew's thoughts about the worst day and what you portend for him as he moves back into public life?
I definitely thought that that was a profound comment that he made. One of the things that disappointed me greatly back in March when this incident first came to bear is the fact that judging off of social media alone and or reading the comments on traditional media comment sections once the articles went viral is how many people concluded summarily that his career was over. They were talking about Brother Gillum in the past tense. And I always thought that was interesting because the historian in me recognized that if you look back just the last 75 years and talk about presidents of the United States, let's talk about a few of the ones who were known philanderers with extramarital affairs. There was one, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a pretty good president. There was Ike Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander during World War II, who served 2 terms, and everybody liked Ike. He too had 2 side women. John F. Kennedy, we all know about his legions of women that he dated in the White House, before the White House, and things of that nature. LBJ also kept a woman. You want to move it more forward? George Herbert Walker Bush was accused of having a girlfriend when he was in the White House, as was his son, George W. Bush, when he was in the White House. So when you look back over 75 years worth of presidents, and you've already hit on some of the issues, the salacious issues with our current president, Donald Trump, it's pretty clear that from time immemorial, powerful men have been philanderers. That doesn't excuse it. That doesn't make it right, but it is what it is. But one of the notable differences is, once again, those powerful men were white men. Whereas on the flip, you have now a budding, powerful Black man who people summarily wanted to dismiss as his career is over. Now, I'm not naive. I've often gone back and forth in my mind. Had Andrew Gillum been found inebriated in a hotel room with 2 women, would the backlash have been severe? I'd like to think probably not, because again, I think that people are more accepting, so to speak, to that kind of potential bad situation than they are with the whole issue of, is he homosexual? Is he bisexual? Or whatever designation is the popular term of art that anyone wants to use. And I think
let's be clear, Chuck. Had he been found in a hotel room with two women, it would have burnished his credentials in any number of circles.
Absolutely. Wasn't that quote from The Godfather 2? You don't want to be found with a dead girl or a live boy, if I'm not mistaken, with Senator Gary from The Godfather 2. And again, that's art imitating life, because I do really believe that part of why he has been crucified, so to speak, has been for that. And that's one of those weird confluences, again, where Black Christians, and I'm calling out my own faith in this regard, actually line right up in lockstep with white evangelical voters. I mean, right here over the last decade, over in Jacksonville, Duval County, there was an ordinance that was being voted on. I can't remember whether it was 2011 or 2012, but Black voters overwhelmingly joined in to try to usurp rights for the LGBTQ community because of thus saith the Lord. And that has been something that I have found problematic for a long time, because at the end of the day, I have always surmised, well, not always. I mean, I've actually evolved on this issue from when I was a younger man, because I was raised up in a Baptist church too, Baptist tradition, went to Morehouse College, where they were constantly preaching one thing, even though we saw the other, sometimes with some of our brothers in class who may have been homosexual at that time. And so I've grown into this, where I've come to realize that, hey, people love who they love. People are born with certain proclivities. And just like I believe David said earlier in his commentary, no one ever has to ask, Chuck, who was the first girl you liked? I mean, yeah, I could spout that out. I was in first or second grade and what have you when I had my first crush, but no one had to tell me to have a crush in first or second grade. I just did. And a lot of my friends who identify with other sexual designations, they say they had the same type of proclivities at 4, 5, 6 years old. And so you're not going to pray that away. You're not going to wish that away. People are who they are. And I think too many people spend too much time worrying about who the next man or woman is loving or how it is they are finding sexual gratification. And I believe that's a conversation that we need to continue to expand in the days ahead.
And it's more complicated than that for some of us. There are some of us who sexuality is more fluid, and we have experiences that show up on the spectrum. I now identify as a same-gender loving man. I have been in romantic and platonic relationships with women that I loved intimately and otherwise. I really want us to accept that the things that we hold on to because of social construction, and because of the assumptions that we make that sometimes make existing with each other in community easier, is often the very base level. It's like the lobby of the building, but there are so many complex and diverse ways that so many of us, in particular Black people, experience life, and in particular sexual identity, gender orientation, and expression, that is so much more complicated than that. And we should provide space for sharing and learning and growth. And I find that far too often the response to things which we don't talk about and that people don't understand is fear and or to make jokes of stuff, rather than leaning in and trying to find ways to learn. You're on mute, Tom.
Sorry about that. Yep. Stacey, you made a comment earlier about the younger people who are dealing with issues of sexual identity. And I wonder, in your position as an expert in the space, what are you seeing, and does it give you hope for the future as we're heading into, this third decade of the 21st century? What do you think the landscape is going to continue to evolve into over the next several years? And do you think that we are approaching a space where sexual identity is at all being destigmatized in any significant way?
Definitely. Listen, when I was in law school in the mid-90s, it was still illegal. The Supreme Court had ruled that same-sex activity, sodomy, was illegal. And it was, 2003 when they overturned their own ruling and said that what you do in the privacy of your home between two consenting adults is your business. It took time but we're still continuing to have progress in that regard. And just to sort of go back to what the point that was made earlier about religion, because I was also raised Baptist. And, the thing is, we're raised in the church, and we just don't have the space or opportunity or conversations about any of the things that don't really line up, right? So like we have what we see relatives who may be like presenting in genders that is not consistent with what we usually expect a male to be doing, or we see people in the choir, or the tropes that I'm sort of drawing on. And so the thing I want to make sure we don't forget is that there are people like the Wileys, Reverend Dennis and Dennis Wiley, and how Christine Wiley, how they have really always been with us in terms of the LGBTQ community, jeopardizing their livelihood and whatnot. There are plenty of people of faith and faith leaders of all walks of life and denominations who are actually affirming and supportive of bisexuality, trans identity, all of those things. And I think that they've walked their own journeys, but it's been incredible to sort of see that shift happen. And Andrew was someone who was out ahead of things before many others, right? So like he was telling people in Florida, come to Jacksonville, you can't get married anywhere else, come here, when he was mayor there. So that type of leadership, that type of willingness to separate yourself from the pack, or to, be the perfect Black person in a difficult, like conservative context, such as politics or practicing law or whatever that may be, it really takes courage to be able to do that. And we need to not have a short memory with regard to all of the ways in which his leadership has been really outstanding for the community.
Yeah, I agree. And Chuck, it looks like you want to jump in, so go on ahead.
Sure. Stacey made a point that I just wanted to also expand a little bit on. That is absolutely right. I think that I find it very problematic that, like I said earlier, in March, there were the encomiums. Oh, his career was great. Here lies Andrew Gillum. No pun intended. It's over. It's not over. This is, Tom, as you said at the top, this young man is sublimely gifted when it comes to not just being a political figure and a mayor and a commissioner, but also as a pundit. If you listen to him talk, if you listen to him break down ideas, he is not a platitudes guy. This is a guy who can go far. And so the question that begs asking is, okay, if other men, like I outlined earlier, can rise to become president of the United States, and most of those men, I must admit, were doing the things that they were doing during an era where there wasn't the 24/7 media and TMZ and things of that nature. But still, the point being that if we can revere an FDR, an Ike Eisenhower, a JFK, an LBJ, so to speak, and still hold them up as these great lights who helped lead the country through dark times and things of that nature, Andrew Gillum, too, his story is far from over. That's the point that I am trying to make. I think that, again, he needs to continue to work on himself. Like he said in the clip that you showed with Tamron Hall, he needs to continue to work on issues with his family. And I believe that, again, when you sat there and you listened to Jay speak this afternoon, it was pretty clear that, again, she's all in support of her husband. And we all know that the road ahead is going to be difficult. Everyone faces difficulties in their personal lives and their marriages and things of that nature. But his story is far from over. And I believe that, again, there are a number of people who get that, who also get, again, we cannot displace the fact that not only are we dealing with bigotry with regards to sexual orientation, but we're still dealing with plain old-fashioned bigotry. When Andrew Gillum won the Democratic nomination 2 years ago, he was far from the front runner throughout that race. Most of the polls here in Florida had him somewhere in between 3 to 5, depending on the day of the week. And when he won, it was a game changer. And there were a number of people, not just conservatives, there were a number of Democrats, a number of white Democrats who were not necessarily that happy with that. Okay. And so that, coupled with the fact that you still have the ideological battle here in Florida, as well as across the country, with regards to moderate Democrats, conservative Democrats, as opposed to progressives and what have you, Andrew has been solidly progressive. He has been closer to the extreme left than he has been to the extreme right part of the Democratic Party. And there are people who were none too happy than to see him have somewhat of a setback in March. But again, to profess the cliche, a setback is often a setup for further success. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the next chapter will be for Brother Gillum.
Well, it is clear that a lot of people weighed in with some very positive feedback about his interview with Tamron. I have a couple of tweets here that I want to share. Joy Reed, kudos to my friend Tamron Hall for a terrific interview with @Andrew Gillum and his wife RJ. That closing comment was fire, and indeed it was. Good on Andrew for living his truth, and know their personal life beyond what they choose to share is none of our business. Best wishes to their family. Then we also had Stan Van Gundy, who opined, I can't wait to get to a time when no one is looked at differently based on gender identification or sexual orientation, and where addiction is seen as a medical problem rather than a character flaw. Andrew Gillum comes out as bisexual. And finally, more on the humorous take, we have Andrew Gillum, I smell a rebranding. I smell somebody who told you to own it. I smell somebody who can sell a bisexual black man to voters. I smell Pope and Associates. So someone who is obviously a fan of that series. And we're hopefully moving into a space where scandal is not the word that we're going to use to define people who are coming into living their truths. Stacey, I want to have you weigh in here as we begin to come to a close to the program. What are your big takeaways for today? What moments in the program actually stood out to you that made you feel the way that you have come to feel about Andrew's revelations today?
Well, I mean, I have tremendous respect for what they did today. Point blank period. I just cannot tell you how impactful it was to have Black people talking to other Black people live about topics that we just need to have many more conversations about. We've got too many issues with respect to substance abuse and mental illness and our health disparities and who's sitting in the White House and all those other things. Like, we really, really need to come together. And the writing's on the wall. I mean, if you look at the polling, the majority of people are with LGBTQ rights. They are with across their religions, across their ages. And the young people, I mean, we're not going to be here forever. And so the young people are already, they have taken the flag and run with it, right? The baton, they are gone. They are gone. And so we really need, our job is to continue to do the hard work of making sure that we can keep as many people safe as possible and really just create the environment where people won't feel compelled to have to be so discreet about who they are. They can be more open about it. And it's just as casual as saying, oh, I decided to dye my hair blonde.
Right. I don't think we have spent enough time talking about RJ. This is a woman who, for many months now, has crossed a wide range of perceptions. First, perhaps pity and concern, and then perhaps some scorn as the silence continued and there was no comments forthcoming. And then as Andrew made his initial forays into coming back and dipping his toe into public life, RJ was still very much behind the scenes and not as present in the forefront. And here in the interview today, she came forward very forcefully. And Chuck, I'd like you to talk a bit, having known the Gillums, being in Tallahassee throughout his meteoric rise. What are your perceptions on the grace and elegance that RJ displayed today?
It was expected. RJ Howard Gillum is again a shining light and an example of standing by your man, your woman, your significant other. Let's just put it that way. When storms in life arise, I believe that again, she was able to do what we often don't see happen among political wives in the public spectrum. I mean, think about this. In 2016, when the Billy Bush tapes dropped, and then there were the comments about Michael Cohen being the fixer with Stormy Daniels and the other young woman. I can never remember her name, but she was the Playboy Playmate. When those revelations came out in October of 2016, there were a number of people who felt that Donald Trump's entire presidential candidacy would be in the tank. And we now know that that was not the case. And yet, even in October 2016, there was no rush to get Melania on to any interviews on national media to discuss what her opinion was. Likewise with Laura Bush back in the 1990s. There are allegations that are documented. You can go Google them. I'm not just making up QAnon type of pulling facts out of the air. George W. Bush was involved with a stripper out in Texas when he was the governor of Texas. And that relationship ended in 1999, curiously, only a few months before he decided, 1998, before he decided to run for president in 2000. You never saw interviews with Laura Bush talking about what type of situation she found herself in. Same with Barbara Bush, with George Herbert Walker Bush. So the point that I'm making here is outside of the interview back in 1992 with Hillary Rodham Clinton and Bill Clinton, when they were calling it, for lack of a better phrase, Bimbogate back then, when there were women coming out of the woodwork seemingly every week accusing Bill Clinton of all sorts of infidelities and improprieties when he was governor of Arkansas. Outside of that 60 Minutes interview with Hillary Rodham Clinton, you generally don't see the political wives having to be front and center to discuss any of the dalliances that their husbands may have had. But here was Jay today. She stood there. She sat there. She discussed it forthrightly. I was very impressed with the young sister. And again, my heart and love go out to her, the children, and Andrew. And again, I believe that the best is yet to come for the Gillum family moving forward.
Yeah, you were talking about Karen McDougal.
That's the one. I can't remember that name. Thanks, Newt.
And it occurs to me that perhaps one of the reasons that so many of those political wives that you mentioned in your surprisingly accurate and long list of philandering in the White House, I mean, you didn't even touch the point that this president is on his third wife and still cheated with at least 2 women that we know of, in between the allegations of sexual assault that have peppered his entire career, not to mention the 3,500 fraud allegations and everything else that have tarred and would have made it impossible for any person with any melanin more than I have in my skin to run for higher office. It occurs to me that maybe some of those women wouldn't have been sitting down with their husbands. Melania can barely touch the man's hand at this point. So to have her sit there and defend him while she was taking care of their toddler child and he was running around pretending that he had the wherewithal to actually satisfy a woman, it just occurs to me that might have been a real twist if we had gotten the honest, unvarnished take on some of those women addressing some of the things that they experienced and the shame that they experienced being a part of those sorts of marriages. But I do think that one of the things that is most important about what we saw in RJ's sitting and being with Andrew today is that she washed away a great number of the questions that people had about the nature of the relationship, clearing away from Jump Street. Before we got married, he revealed this to me. I knew walking in what I was walking into. And that's important. It changes a fundamental aspect of this whole enterprise that I think was looming over people's perceptions. The fact that he was being dishonest to his wife, and her understanding and the grace she is willing to put forward in dealing with Andrew. And these are not revelations that anyone would like to have to deal with, period. Straight, gay, bi, whatever. Having your lives splashed on national television and across tabloid newspapers and the photos that were released and all those sorts of things. No one would want to have that happen, but especially for a public figure, and especially for a public figure whose scrutiny was so intense based on the circumstances of the revelations that drove this. I thought she was extraordinary. And it made me, I think I only met RJ for the first time during the year that Andrew was running, because of course I had many years graduated by the time Andrew's star had risen. Although I will say, I was responsible for his SGA promotional materials way back in the day. And I have helped to produce materials for each aspect of his rise because of my relationship with some of the folks who are at Florida A&M. But I had never met her. And there was a fundraiser during homecoming, and I was there. And really, it was all of FAMU that was at Darryl Park's house. It was a remarkable fundraiser. And I got to spend just a few bare moments and seeing the two of them together and seeing how they were on the campaign trail and seeing all the things that they were working for and toward. To see her rebound and support him in this moment, I thought was as strong a statement about the nature of marriage as could possibly be made. And I just honestly wish all the best for them. I think that there is, as you have said, Chuck, I think the postmortem on Andrew Gillum is far too premature. I think there is still a lot of space for him to do some amazing things for his community, for the country, for the community that he is now embracing. I think there's a lot of things on the table for him now that perhaps weren't a part of his original plan as he envisioned it. But now the door is open, and given the way things are evolving in our own country, if we can get Orange Man out of office on November 3rd, there's no telling what Andrew is going to be able to do in the future. I'm going to give everybody a chance to offer some final thoughts. David, since you're in the clockwise position, give us your final words on how you feel about Andrew's reintroduction into public life.
I don't really see it in that way, right? I think that Andrew has been consistent even after the gubernatorial opportunity having been stolen from him in Florida. He's been consistent in showing up, being a public servant, trying to answer questions and provide direction for us to move forward. And I want to honor and acknowledge that. I remain excited about the ways that he's showing up. My puppy's clearly mad that we're having to have this conversation on tonight. But I think that for me, all of this is important because I'm super excited, as you said, for all of the ways that Andrew will continue to lead in ways that have been consistent based on what he's done heretofore and the new things that now exist because of his inviting us in.
Stacey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, we probably don't know how many lives were saved just by virtue of the fact that they were willing to be open about their situation, about their personal private lives, and about how they have grappled with something that is so intimate and so difficult. And the fact that both of them continue to reference the covenant of marriage and how they are navigating an experience that until you have had it, you don't even really know what it takes to get through. And so they have modeled what one should do when you meet someone. So the next time a bisexual woman or a bisexual man or a bisexual person meets someone and the sparks are there and it looks like there's a future, they can have that open and honest, upfront conversation about who they are without having to then look over their shoulder. Are we going to run into someone who I used to date? Is this going to cause a problem? You know, it's just not worth it. And as I said before, the writing is on the wall, right? Like, this is the future. This is where we're going. And I think that the future is going to be bright. It'll be difficult, but it's going to be bright.
Chuck?
People need to learn to mind their business. That's number one. Number two, Democrats need to also own the fact that while, yes, we can discuss aspects of the election being stolen in 2018, the simple fact was when the recount finished, there were still fewer people who were Democrats in certain areas that voted for Andrew Gillum than voted for Senator Bill Nelson. That has stuck at me for over 18 months because it made me conclude that, again, we still are dealing with racial issues, not just with the Republican Party down here in Florida, but with some Democrats as well who did not join the Gillum train back in 2018. With that said, again, I'm looking forward to his future. I'm looking forward to seeing him get back on the air. As you know, Tom, we have had some talks with him and some folks about even getting on the air with us. soon enough because the guy's bright. He can bring it. And I'm definitely looking forward to what his next step will be. Will that be a congressional seat down the line? Will it be another gubernatorial race in 2022? Will it be a presidential race down the line? I don't know, but I do know that the same young man that I have supported since he was in high school, I will be supporting him until they put me out at Southside Cemetery, hopefully many, many years from now.
Well, we did have a comment from Jerome Cummings to your point, Chuck. RJ could be the next Michelle Obama. And I think that as we enter the final phases of this presidential election year, I just want to close with the note that some states have already begun early voting. It has never been more important than in my lifetime, certainly, for people to exercise the franchise and to make sure that you avail yourself of every opportunity to get your vote cast and counted well before November 3rd. We know that between COVID and shenanigans with the Postmaster General, who very shortly may be under investigation, are conspiring against us to create an environment where it will be more difficult for more citizens to cast their ballots than ever before. And so what we want to do is to know the rights of our states in which we live. We want to make sure that we are taking every opportunity for early voting. In some states like Ohio, there's going to be 210 days of vote, not 210 days, I'm sorry, 210 hours of voting available to people before Election Day. And so we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that we are having our votes counted. That's especially important in states like Georgia that very nearly were tipped in favor of the possible Governor Stacey Abrams. It's very important in states like Florida where the felon reenfranchisement has come into another very tough blow in the last week. But it is important to note that Mike Bloomberg is actually investing $100 million of his own money, as opposed to something that Trump said he might be forced to do, to bring the heat to him in Florida. There are so many states that are tipping points, so many states that are important for every single electoral vote that we can bring to the table. So Arizona, Kentucky, Alabama, Texas, Georgia, certainly with 2 open Senate seats. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to convert and bring back the Senate as well. And I just want to encourage everyone to be on the front lines, not only for yourself, but for your grandmothers, your great aunties. Get those ladies, get those gentlemen in the cars with you. Volunteer to be a poll worker to make sure that you are making it as easy as possible for people to vote. And while we're looking at this, let's hope that Andrew is able to contribute some of the outstanding leadership that he has done in the past to help drive that engagement and to help lead the charge for folks to really come out in Florida, because if the blue takes Florida, the orange goes home. I hope that everyone has enjoyed this conversation. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. First, soon-to-be Dr. David Johns, and Stacey Long Simmons, and of course, my partner, every single episode of Steel Sharpens Steel, Chuck Hobbs. I am Tom Cunningham, and we want you to join us each and every week as we engage in the topics and the conversations that need to be had. This is Steel Sharpens Steel.